I've been a bit torn about whether or not to even make this video. So what I thought I'm gonna do is I'm gonna approach this with less of a, oh my god, look at all these cool dresses, here is the best dress list. And instead, we're gonna focus on the fact that this is a cultural event that happened and we're just gonna do some commentary on it. So year after year, the Met Gala is slowly turning from a wholesome charity event to a dystopian, opulent Hunger Games show-off. No wonder we are less and less invested in what rich people are doing. Why would we care? And it's a bit sad because the Met Gala used to be a celebration of fashion and creativity, and it still is. But is it ethical to celebrate fashion when your country is actively at war that it started? Is it ethical when the event is sponsored by the fourth richest man in the world? But then, if the answer is to boycott, what happens in the future? If billionaires buy all the museums, do we just stop going? What happens when art is overtaken by the rich? There is also a lot of voices being raised about whether or not events like these are even appropriate given how many horrible things are going on in the world. I feel like this is an old argument and this is a dangerous argument in a way, because whenever a new building is planned in my city, a museum, a cultural institution, whatever, everyone is always like, okay, but given this and then this, should we be spending money on such frivolous things? And the answer, I genuinely don't know. Like, I know that people need to eat. People deserve to live in dignified living conditions. And there is always something more pressing than art. But then if we always wait for the right moment to give money to art, this moment might never came. Art, and especially fashion, is usually seen as something frivolous, as something a little bit silly compared to other things we consume culturally, like, let's say, sports. I don't think anyone was trying to cancel the Winter Olympics just because people can't afford groceries. The cost of hosting the Met Gala is apparently around $10 million, and the newest Spider-Man movie coming out this year cost $275 million. But I don't see anyone complaining about it as being something too frivolous to produce in the current climate. Of course, as I said, with the Met Gala, there are other dilemmas involved, but it is no secret that when it comes to this particular criticism of spending money extravagantly, fashion often gets much worse treatment than other forms of entertainment. At the same time, there's probably no other event that is so opulent and vain as the Met Gala. It's literally like a marketplace of celebrities trying to sell themselves. Which is sad because it shouldn't just be about rich people showing off. It's about the invention of the designers. It's about pushing the boundaries of fashion. And most of all, the craftsmanship. There is a lot of crafts at the brink of extinction that have been brought back into the spotlight thanks to the Met Gala. There is a lot of cultural themes and cultural fashions. There is a lot of forgotten techniques that are finally being recognized thanks to the Met Gala. There is a lot of iconic designers and figures, and this year there is also a lot of painters and artists and pieces of art being brought back into the public discourse after years or decades or hundreds of years even. This video is sponsored by NordVPN. You can head over to nordvpn.com/Carolina to get a 2-year NordVPN plan plus 4 months extra. Nord has a 30-day money-back guarantee, so it's risk-free. As you know, I spend a lot of time researching online, browsing vintage shops, digging through historical archives, scrolling through fashion auction sites. So obviously it's really important for me to stay secure while I'm surfing the web. And NordVPN helps with that. And it's also the fastest VPN on the planet. So if you also take staying safe online seriously, go to nordvpn.com/Carolina to get 4 months extra on a 2-year plan. NordVPN has launched a new Threat Protection Pro feature, which blocks phishing, malware, trackers, ads. Threat Protection Pro can also detect things like fake shops and scammy websites. NordVPN also has a dark web monitor that continuously scans the dark web to make sure that none of your info is leaked or being sold online. So go get a 2-year NordVPN plan plus 4 months extra at nordvpn.com/Carolina and enjoy safe research. So this is what we're going to focus on in commenting particular looks. We're going to focus on the educational or homage part of it. I'm probably going to miss some because there's a lot of people at the event. So the theme this year was fashion is art. So obviously there's a lot of art and history, inspirations and references in the outfits. I think it's a good theme. It's perhaps a little easy. It's very tame, but it also gives a lot of space for creative solutions. So starting off with Rachel Zegler, she channeled the execution of Lady Jane Grey, which is a good concept. I feel like the dress could have been a little more light, if you know what I mean, like gauzy or just a little more similar to the actual painting. Claire Foy did Madame X, which I think was okay. Julianne Moore also did a Madame X reference, very subtle and very Julianne Moore, but also a little bit boring. Amy Sherald referenced her own piece, which I think is quite iconic, to recreate your own painting and sort of become your art, basically. That's a very interesting concept. Hunter Schafer did the Mada Primavesi, a painting by Klimt. Naomi Watts embodied Dutch still life paintings. Luke Evans recreated a Tom of Finland look. Alexa Chung did Monet water lilies. Madonna did The Temptation of St. Anthony by Leonora Carrington. I'm a little torn on this one because while I really like the concept of recreating a minor background character from a painting, what looked cool in the painting, just a bunch of people holding a piece of cloth together, looked a little sus when it's a couple of women of color holding the dress of a white woman. I don't know, there was just something a little bit off about it. There was a lot of things inspired by classical art, which was kind of easy to predict because it just looks good. Like no one went for Baroque because it's too difficult to pull off. The sexy flowy gowns of the classical era sculptures, that's way easier to pull off. Ben Platt wore a suit that was inspired by a Sunday afternoon on the island of La Grande, which I thought was a really cute idea, but I don't like the fit of the suit. Angela Bassett did Girl in Pink dress. I really didn't like the way that dress fits. I think it's gorgeous, but the fit is just off. And then Heidi Klum did the Veiled Virgin. Why does it have to be so scary? Why does she have to look possessed? They could have just done fake eyelids that covered her eyes and pretended that her eyes are closed, and then they would have those, it's either mesh or they would have holes so she could actually see. I think that would be much cooler and prettier and less uncanny. Then we have Emma Chamberlain. I have to say it's probably my favorite. It looked like dripping paint. It looked like Van Gogh paintings. It looked like Impressionism. And there were actually other looks that were inspired by just the medium of paint and not particular art pieces. Tessa Thompson wore something that looked a little bit like dripping paint. Grace Ling wore a splash of paint, basically, which I thought was really interesting. Ciara was inspired by Nefertiti, which I think is also interesting because there is a lot of art in the Met itself that is obviously not originally American. And then we have Sam Smith. I know he kind of looks like Isma. But also, as soon as I saw him, I was like, oh my god, that's an Erte design. I mean, obviously not one-to-one, but that's inspired by the Erte designs from the 1920s. I think the problem with Sam Smith and why people dislike his looks is that he's not a skinny model type looking man. So everyone's like, that looks funny. But if one of the guys from Heated Rivalry wore that, everyone would be praising them. So I'm always a little bit like, that's phobia though. But then we have the Indians. The Indians know how to do Met Gala, let's face it. If there is anything that's opulent and magnificent and peak of craftsmanship, that's gotta be Indian fashion. So Karan Johar had this really cool coat. It was inspired by Indian classical paintings and it was apparently hand painted. This is absolutely insane. And then the designer, Manish Malhotra, he had an outfit that featured a lot of different embroidery techniques from India. Sudha Reddy had her outfit inspired by kalamkari, so ancient textile printing art. And wait till you see the back of this dress because honestly, incredible. I could actually probably watch Met Gala just in India. just the Indian celebrities, because they're just so inventive and they always bring this very personal aspect to it of the pride of being Indian and what that means to them, and displaying traditional crafts and arts. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. So we have all these beautiful art references, and then there is Jeff Bezos. I mean, he wasn't actually at the red carpet, he just left his wife there to fend for herself. And Lauren Sanchez Bezos went for another Madame X reference, and to be honest, this look was disappointing. It was just very simple, but not in like a minimalistic way, in a kind of boring way. The whole drama of Sargent's portrait is that the shoulders are bare, and she covered her shoulders with her hair. So what's the point? Why did the dress have to be navy instead of black? I also don't know. It's basically a rendition of the type of a dress she usually wears, but also with a hint of, see, this woman was ostracized by society and everyone was so rude to her, and I'm kind of the same. I don't know if that's the vibe she was going for, but there is also, you know, the whole story of Madame X and how the model was treated and how everyone hated her. So I'm just saying. And finally, we have this.
Of 100 dresses from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s that we constructed to make this.
Gagging.
Painted, beaded.
At first I died a little, and then I started thinking of possible options that could make it a little bit better, slightly less terrifying, so that was definitely a coping mechanism. But first off, she says 100, but I was looking at the dress and I was going like, where? Because it looks like much bigger chunks of fabric than you know, small tiny pieces of 100 dresses. Then the designer actually confirmed that it's 30 dresses being used that he got on eBay, so this is still pretty bad, but it's not as bad as 100. Second of all, I wanted to believe that the dresses were actually falling apart and beyond the point of saving, so they just used scraps. But then if it was this very dry type of silk that we get with old dresses, I don't think it would be wearable. I think it would just crack and rip. And the dresses that they use, I'm assuming, were actually in pristine condition because it's the Met Gala. You wouldn't want to step on the stairs of the Met and rip your dress during the Met Gala. So they just couldn't afford to have a dress that rips. All in all, it still is really sad that vintage and antique pieces get no respect because people don't really realize how valuable they are. Not even in terms of the money, but in terms of this collective cultural memory of what we used to wear. And sure, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of vintage dresses on eBay, and probably not all of them are like one-of-a-kind collector's item. Most of it is just regular, plain, probably cheaply made dresses. Let's not act like every vintage dress sold on eBay is museum quality, but some of them are surely one-of-a-kind, and now we're never going to see them because those 30 dresses were horribly mutilated. In general, this is the attitude that I think speeds up the process of vintage dresses becoming extinct. Because if we all collectively think, oh, but there's still so many of them, it doesn't really matter, it's not a big deal, then eventually there will be none left, as has happened many times in the past. So in general, respect the antique drip. Back to the main topic though, should the Met Gala continue in the current form, with the ties it has now? What's the future of the Met Gala? I don't know. It definitely seems like a moment when the gap between what's going on in the world and what's being shown on the red carpet is just too big to overcome for most people and too large to ignore. Sarah Paulson's look was sort of a commentary on how the gala is slowly overtaken by the rich that don't even care about fashion, but then she's also definitely not poor and she rubs the shoulders with the rich all the time. So this was a bit confusing as a statement. And then at the same time, fashion has always been elitist and classist. Let's not act like Dior was ever accessible to people. High fashion has always been serving as an art form rather than inspiration. And big budgets mean that the designers can let loose their creativity and utilize the costly and time-consuming crafts to make that art. So yes to fashion, no to billionaires. That's the takeaway from this. Bye.